In the last section, we introduced the idea of this connect helper right here from the React Redux library. And we said that it was going to help us get access to our application state inside of a given component. So let's now continue with this implementation. I'm inside of my library list file right here. And we still have our connect helper wired up right now, but it's not really appearing to do anything too much for us. So here's how we use this connect helper. With connect helper, we can pass in a first argument to it, so like first argument inside of the first set of parentheses, as a function. And I'm going to call this function MapStateToProps. It's going to take an argument of state, like so. And then I'm going to pass it in as the first argument. Okay, so I know that I just kind of jumped the gun there a little bit, threw a bunch of stuff up on the screen without giving you a good idea of what's going on. So let's just take a quick pause and discuss what's happening. The purpose of this function right here, MapStateToProps, is to do just what the function name says right here. And I know the function name is kind of a little bit confusing, but it is somewhat reasonable once I explain it. The purpose of this function is to take our global state object. So this is our application state, the thing that sits inside of our Redux store. And it will map it in some fashion, or kind of like take some properties off of that state object and then provide them as props to our component of library list. So that is the purpose of MapStateToProps. In practice though, well, sure, the description is easy to say, but let's actually kind of figure out how this thing works. Let's get started by putting a console log inside this function right here and just see when it gets called and what it gets called with. So I'm going to add a console log of state. So let's look at what the state object is, figure out what properties it has, and also figure out when this console log right here gets called, or excuse me, this MapStateToProps function gets called. Now before I can refresh the simulator and run this code right here, if you recall, we are not actually showing the library list anywhere inside of our application right now. So we need to first go into our app.js file and make sure that we actually show the library list inside of here. Remember, just because we created a component doesn't actually necessarily mean that it's going to be visible on the screen. So at the top, we will import library list from components library list. And then I'm going to place it inside of the view tag inside our component. So library list, like so. Cool. So I'm going to pop open Chrome. I've got my debugger here already. One quick thing I want to mention, back inside of library list, we are not returning any valid JSX from this component just yet, so I'm going to expect to see a big error message. That's totally fine. We should still see the console log anyway, so we will see an error, but it will still be useful for us. So back in my simulator, I will refresh, and yep, get a nice big error there, but that's totally fine. Here is the console log from that MapStateToProps function. So our MapStateToProps function got called with one argument at the top, and the argument we called state because it is our application state. So check out this object right here. It is an object with a key of libraries and a value of, an array of objects, where each object represents one of our particular libraries. So this is starting to tie the whole story together a little bit, right? We now have, if I flip over to my reducers file, index.js, I had said that our state object will have a key of libraries and a value of the list of libraries produced by our library reducer. So when our application first boots up, it evaluates this statement right here. It executes the library reducer one time to get some initial state put together. And therefore our initial state object when our app first boots up is an object with a key of libraries and a value of whatever got produced from the library reducer. So then when our MapStateToProps function is executed, with the first argument being our application state, we saw that console log, and yep, it definitely was our application state. Okay, but that's just kind of step one right here. All right, that's step one. We have now verified that MapStateToProps is called. This function right here gets called, and the first argument is state. But again, I had said, we're going to use connect to somehow get access to our state object or some properties out of it and pass them to the library list. That was the whole goal here. Communicate the list of libraries to the library list component. And so right now we're not quite doing that. We've got access to the state object inside of MapStateToProps, but how do I actually communicate any data from this function into this component? Well, to do so, here's kind of the magic of MapStateToProps. If I return a function, or excuse me, if I return an object from this function right here, that object will show up as props to my component library list. Okay, so let's see what that looks like in practice. If I return an object from this function right here, it will show up as props to library list. So I'm going to make an object with a key of libraries and a value of state.libraries. Remember, state.libraries would be a reference to my array of libraries, so it should have like 9 objects inside of it. So now I'm going to expect that my component library list has a prop of libraries and a value of the array of libraries. I know that library word is just flying all over the place here. Hopefully we can keep that word in check at least somewhat. So just as a test, inside my render method, I'm going to put in a console log of this.props. So my expectation now is that my props object should have a libraries property to it with a value of the list of libraries, like the array of all those objects. So I'm going to go back over to Chrome. I will refresh my console, or just clear it, excuse me, and then I will refresh my simulator. So I refresh my simulator, I still get an error here because I'm not returning any valid JSX. But if I expand this console log statement right here, you'll see that I have an object with a property of dispatch, which is a function. We'll talk more about that later. But more importantly, I have a property of libraries, and that is an array that contains all the libraries for my application. So clearly, this connect helper is forging a connection between our library list and our application state. Again, that is the whole purpose of the connect helper. It is what forges a connection between our React side of our application and the Redux side. Okay, so we clearly have our data inside the component at this point in time. Let's now continue in the next section and figure out exactly how we're going to build our list out of all these different libraries.